Sujin's body is found at an old, abandoned bathhouse. Her father, Sang-Hyun, is heartbroken and feels powerless after her tragic death. One day, he receives a mysterious text message with information about the person who killed his daughter. Following the directions in the message, Sang-Hyun goes to an address and finds a man named Chul-Yong. Chul-Yong is laughing while watching a horrible video of Sujin being attacked and killed. Overwhelmed with anger and pain, Sang-Hyun snaps and kills Chul-Yong on the spot. But soon after, Sang-Hyun realizes that Chul-Yong wasn't acting alone, another person is involved. Determined to bring the accomplice to justice, Sang-Hyun searches for this second person. At the same time, Detective Yuk-Gwon, who is leading the investigation into Sujin's murder, visits the scene of Chul-Yong's death. It doesn't take long for Yuk-Gwon to figure out that Sang-Hyun is the one who killed Chul-Yong. He sets out to find Sang-Hyun before the grieving father can go any further down this path of revenge. Now, it becomes a race between Sang-Hyun, who is hunting for the other man responsible for his daughter's death, and Detective Yuk-Gwon, who is trying to find Sang-Hyun before it's too late. The story begins with Lee, who holds anger, pain, and remorse in his heart. To understand this, the story takes us to a flashback where Lee's life took a painful turn. Lee's wife had passed away due to illness, leaving him with all the responsibilities of caring for their daughter, Sujin. Although Lee could have chosen to remarry, his love for his late wife and daughter kept him from doing so. Sujin was frustrated with Lee because he came home late every night. When he did get home, he was always preoccupied with work and didn't spend any time with her. Lee was given more work than he could handle by his senior, who told him that if he didn't complete it quickly, many people would lose their jobs. This left Lee feeling completely trapped. He couldn't manage the workload properly, nor could he spend time with his daughter. Despite these challenges, Lee kept up his responsibilities without losing hope. Lee sent a message to his daughter, Sujin, saying he would be late that night. Meanwhile, Sujin was enjoying herself when she noticed a black car nearby. The scene shifts back to Lee, who arrives home with gifts to make his daughter happy, only to find that she isn't there. It was already late at night, and Lee felt an increasing sense of worry. He tried calling his daughter, Sujin, but her phone was turned off. Thinking she might have stayed over at a friend's house, he put his concerns aside and went to bed, ready for work the next day. This was not unusual for their family. Lee often left for the office early in the morning without confirming whether Sujin had gone to school. It was part of their routine, and he would usually call her during the day to check in on her well-being. But that day was unlike any other, one that would change Lee's life forever. The next morning, Lee went to work as usual, unaware of the storm that was about to upend his world. Hours passed, and he didn't realize that Sujin hadn't gone to school. Then, a devastating call came. The police informed him that a teenage girl's body had been found in an abandoned building, and they suspected it was Sujin. At first, Lee refused to believe it. His mind raced, clinging to the idea that Sujin was safe and at a friend's house. He told the officer not to bother him and tried to convince himself it was a misunderstanding. But Officer Jang, who was leading the investigation, insisted that Lee come to identify the body. As Lee approached the police station, his legs felt like they were made of lead. His heart thudded painfully in his chest as he tried to prepare himself for what lay ahead. The world around him seemed to blur, and each step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the room and saw Sujin's lifeless body, it was as if time stood still. The daughter he had dreamed of watching grow up, succeed, and thrive was gone, lying motionless before him. Tears filled Lee's eyes as he noticed the marks on her hands and the broken nails that spoke volumes. Sujin had fought with all her might, struggling desperately to save herself. This realization pierced Lee's heart, filling him with immense grief and regret. Memories of moments he hadn't shared with her and the times he'd chosen work over spending time with his daughter flooded back, drowning him in sorrow. If only he had been there for her, he thought. Maybe, just maybe, things could have turned out differently. Officer Jang, understanding the unimaginable pain Lee was going through, reassured him that the police would do everything in their power to find the person responsible and bring justice to Sujin. But those words did little to ease the agony Lee felt. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming heartache. Every corner of the house reminded him of Sujin, making his loss feel even more unbearable. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation pressed on. Officer Jun, who was assisting Jang, reported that a crucial piece of evidence had been found. A black vintage car had been spotted near the area where Sujin had been kidnapped. The footage came from a nearby CCTV camera, but the number plate was obscured due to heavy rain. This discovery brought a glimmer of hope, a lead that could potentially reveal who had taken Sujin's life. With this new clue, the entire police team set to work. They combed through records of vintage car owners and sought out witnesses who might have seen the car on the day Sujin disappeared. After this, we see a couple working as truck drivers. They are discussing the case of their relative, saying that whoever committed such a crime deserves the death penalty. We then meet their son, Andy, who is terrified after seeing Sujin's missing person poster, which urges any witnesses to come forward and call the police. In a flashback, we learn that Andy and his friends had kidnapped Sujin and drugged her before committing the terrible crime. Now, Andy is consumed by fear and guilt. He tells his friends that they need to act fast, but his friends dismiss him, saying they should leave everything as it is. They remind him that if the police ask questions, they should pretend to know nothing, and argue that this is the first time things have gone so wrong. They had kidnapped girls before, but nothing like this had ever happened. Andy's guilt overwhelms him, so he decides to contact Lee using Sujin's phone. At the last moment, he changes his mind and instead sends Lee a message with the address of his friend Kim's house, adding that Lee would find the key under the flower pot and evidence in a shoebox. Lee goes to Kim's house and finds CDs containing recordings. As Lee is watching them, Kim arrives, forcing Lee to hide. Kim, unaware of Lee's presence, makes a call and tells someone he will review the videos thoroughly before selling them. Seeing his daughter's suffering in the recordings, Lee is overcome with rage. He attacks Kim, beating him severely and eventually killing him in a fit of anger. Shortly after, a message arrives on Kim's phone instructing him to bring the CDs to Gangwon quickly. Lee realizes that someone named Joe was involved with Kim on the night of the crime. Lee hurries to Gangwon, and at the same time, Officer Jang finds out about Kim's involvement through CCTV footage. It turned out that the boys were involved in a larger operation where they recorded and sold videos online. A tip led to the realization that the mastermind behind this operation was making money from stolen videos. The investigation also uncovered stolen property papers connected to the case. When the police reached Kim's house, the scene was grim. Kim's lifeless body was sprawled on the floor, and Dr. Janko, the forensic expert, quickly noted that his injuries were severe, especially the crushing damage to his lower body. This suggested an act of personal revenge, an attack driven by deep anger. As Jang examined the evidence in the room, he stumbled upon a set of videos. One video featured Sujin, and it clicked for Jang. Lee had killed Kim to avenge Sujin. The other videos showed different victims, but Sujin's was missing. This absence was enough to confirm what Jang suspected. Lee hadn't involved the police because he had already set out on his path of revenge. Determined, Jang headed to Lee's home, hoping to find him before it was too late. But Lee was already gone, hunting down Joe, another suspect tied to Sujin's case. Jang urgently told his team that they needed to track down Lee before he acted again. There was still one boy in the videos who was alive and might be in danger. Digging deeper, Jang discovered that Andy, one of Kim's friends from school, knew more than he was letting on. When questioned, Andy nervously admitted that he and his friends were involved in Sujin's kidnapping but insisted he didn't know what happened afterward. Meanwhile, through his sources, Jang learned that Joe was hiding at the Masun Institute, a place known for its secretive operations. Jang sent a team to the institute, but Joe, trying to distance himself from the mounting chaos, told Yang he wanted out of their scheme. Yang, who was focused only on profit, offered Joe more money, persuading him to stay and keep making recordings. As Joe prepared to leave, he received a message from Kim's phone, unaware that it had been sent by Lee, who had uncovered Kim's dark plans. In a secluded corner of the city, Lee found Joe and confronted him. The confrontation escalated into a violent fight. Lee's rage was overpowering, and in the end, he killed Joe and took his rifle. As he made his escape, Lee dropped his ID card, which Jang's team found soon after. This was proof that Lee had been at the scene and was responsible for Joe's death. Now, Jang knew Lee was armed and dangerous, making him both a target for the police and a high-profile story for the media. Kim's family was relentless in their demand for justice, insisting that Lee be arrested for his actions. Jang, however, bluntly reminded them that Kim himself had committed serious crimes. He assured them that Lee would be brought in but made no other promises. Lee, meanwhile, had tracked Joe to a secluded lodge in Gangwon province. Cold, tired, and emotionally spent, Lee called Jang, telling him he would surrender but only after he had finished what he set out to do. Jang's team, already closing in on the Emerald Lodge, knew they had to hurry. When Joe arrived at the lodge, he was met by Lee. Lee didn't know exactly what Joe looked like, but he had a strong feeling. To be sure, Lee boarded a bus and began questioning a man he thought might be Joe. Joe, keeping his cool, managed to convince Lee that he was just another passenger. Meanwhile, Jang, desperate to catch both men, set up a sting operation at the lodge. Joe, thinking he was safe, arrived at the lodge only to find Lee waiting for him. A tense chase began. Jang arrived and shouted for Lee to stop, urging him to let justice take its course. But Lee, driven by grief and revenge, ignored him. He caught up to Joe and cornered him, rifle in hand. With shaking hands, Lee was ready to shoot when Jang, out of breath, appeared and yelled for him to stop. He promised Lee that Sujin's death would not be in vain and that justice would be served. But Lee, now beyond reason, fired the rifle, only to hear a hollow click. It was empty. Before Lee could process what had happened, one of Jang's officers, acting on instinct, fired a shot. The bullet hit Lee, and he fell, lifeless, to the ground. In the quiet aftermath, Jang looked down at Lee's body and felt the weight of everything. Lee had known that taking Joe's life wouldn't bring Sujin back. He had made peace with dying, seeing it as a release from the pain that had consumed him. In that bittersweet moment, it was as if Lee's spirit found Sujin, and they walked away together, reunited in peace. After the chaos settled, Jang sat in his kitchen, staring at the last pieces of evidence. He remembered Lee asking him to destroy everything, to leave no trace. June, Jang's young protege, walked in and noticed Jang's expression. "What's on your mind?" June asked quietly. Jang, eyes clouded with exhaustion, said, "I've been chasing shadows for so long. Even after it ends, they never really go away." June didn't respond, sensing that Jang was speaking to himself as much as to anyone else. At that moment, the silence was heavy with unspoken truths. The next day, Joe faced the consequences of his actions in court. As the verdict was read, Jang was there, watching him. Joe's eyes met Jang's, and for the first time, he seemed to understand the magnitude of what he had done. The lives he had shattered, the grief he had caused, it was all laid bare in the silent room. Jang's gaze was unyielding, a reminder that justice had been served, but at a tremendous cost. As the story drew to a close, the pain of loss and the cycle of vengeance were palpable. The lives of everyone involved had been marked forever. Jang stood by his promise to Lee, keeping watch even when justice was served. The memory of that day, the sound of the empty rifle, and the look in Lee's eyes stayed with him. It was a reminder that sometimes, in the pursuit of justice, the cost can be unbearably high. What did you think of this story? What kind of punishment should Kim, Yang, and Joe have faced? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for the latest updates. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you can watch more movies like this. Thanks for watching.